Spider-Man's here. Hey there and welcome to Riggs Garage. 2023 is going to be the year of boost on this channel. This video is covering the assembly of the short block for the D15 B7 for my 93 Civic hatchback. This thing is getting ready for a turbo, so it's got aftermarket pistons and rods, has Vitara pistons. So if you don't know about Vitara pistons, definitely search those, but this is a common D-series single cam Honda build. In this video, we're going to paint the engine block, we're going to notch the engine block and the main girdle so that it can fit the aftermarket rods. We're going to gap piston rings and we're going to check oil clearances on the mains and the rods. And finally, we'll put the rings on, we'll slam the pistons home in that engine, and I'll show you everything along the way. Come along with me. Hopefully you enjoy this content. Looking to get this engine in the car soon, so stick with me as we build this Civic. It's going to be a fast street car with turbo. And if you haven't seen the other videos, I'll post a link to the Civic playlist right up here so you can follow along with the build. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. All right, on the Honda D-Series, when you use aftermarket rods for boost, many times you will need to notch the block here and the girdle so the rods aren't going to hit it when the engine's all put together. So I'll kind of show you what I'm going through here. If you haven't seen my other video, I do run through all the parts that I bought for this engine, and I'll link that up above here somewhere. But let's have a look at this engine. Here's a better look at the D-Series block. This is a D15 B7, but what I'm going to do here is put the crank in here. I'll put a couple bearings to support it, and I will also put the rods and pistons in, no rings, and rotate it and see where it hits. I'm going to go ahead and mark the spots here where I'll need to chamfer the edges of the cylinder wall and on the girdle up in here. What we're doing is clearancing for these P to P0. These are D15 USDM, US domestic market spec, and they are made for Vitara pistons. These are Grand Vitara pistons. This is a common combination for the Honda D-Series. And what I'm going to do is put bearings and all this stuff real quick. I'll use these snap rings and install the pistons and rods, and kind of catch up with you there in a second. All right, she's rotating nice and freely. Let's put some more rods in. Here's a better view of what I was talking about on the main girdle. So as the top of the rod swings around, we're going to be watching right here for those ARP rod bolts to be possibly hitting in this path somewhere. Boom, right there maybe. So there is plenty of room here to clearance this. So let's put one in and see what happens. See if that rod will hit. Whoa. Man, that's not hitting anywhere. I mean, it's super close. Right there. Right there. Man, it's pretty good. Alright, piston 2 also has no contact anywhere. Since these are so close, I am going to start marking things to kind of shave a little bit of material off the girdle. See how close that is. It's like a millimeter, but It'll be better to be safe than sorry. Crank is out, girdle's off. I marked up the girdle where I'm gonna just do a slight notch. I think I could run it as it sits. I think there's a millimeter or two of clearance, but man, I want to feel comfortable about spinning this engine hard. I also marked these, so I'll just take a little bit of a loop out of there. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is get the die grinder. I've got these carbide bits. They're kind of commonly used for porting. Luckily, they have this long shank. My friend Matt over at MRE Motorsports loaned these to me. Thank you, Matt. Check out his YouTube channel. It's really good stuff. Even though I don't think it needed notching, I went ahead and did it. It came out pretty decently. It's not perfect. Here we go here. And then the girdle is more visibly ugly. I started getting better at it as I went. This is my first time doing it. But I just took a millimeter off here. Should clear really nicely now, I think. Just want it in safe zone. I want to drive this car and not have to worry about stuff touching that should not be touching. Yes, that is a victory. Victory! I'm going to give this a little bit of heat. We're going to burn the impurities off the metal. I learned this from Uncle Tony's garage. There's a lot of moisture coming out. I think I'm going to use this Rust-Oleum Gloss Smoke Gray. This is the same color that I used on the Civic steel wheels, so I'm going to brush it on because it's freezing outside and I don't want to spray. And it seems like Rust-Oleum in the brushed on form. Non-aerosol seems to last way longer. I'm probably going to put a tiny bit of this hardener in it, as well as a little bit of this Japan dryer. Makes it dry a little bit faster. So I've got a bunch left here. That's good. That's what I'm going to put together now. Here's where we are. This is one coat. And let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll hit any spots. We have a few drips because the brush unloads when you shove the paint into some of these crevices. But for engine, and this is the back side, it looks really good. If you made it this far, God bless you. Hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Back to it. Another night. We are going to put the bearings in the block here and lay the crank down with no lubrication, and we're going to plastic gauge this. That's going to check the oil bearing clearances, and we're going to look to those, make sure they are to spec. Alright, according to the book here, main bearing oil clearance. Journals 1 and 5. 7 10,000ths to 14 thousandths. 2 thousandths maximum. That's journals 1 and 5. Journals 2, 3, and 4. 9 10,000ths to 17 thousandths of an inch. Also 2 thousandths inch maximum. The main is going to be torqued down to 33 foot-pounds, so let's get some bearings in this stuff. I'll go ahead and kind of glue these thrust bearings in. Like that. This is a good glob of assembly lube on the back. Sticks them in there. And this side with the grooves in it goes out towards the crankshaft. And the bearing doesn't indicate top or bottom on these. They all look the same. So there are no oil holes in the block here. Now I'm going to lay the crank in the block. I'm not going to rotate it, there's no lube here. This is just for bearing clearance checking, right? Very gentle, very gentle. Watch your thrust bearings. Let's put the bearings in the girdle now. Same as the block. Now this does have oil holes, but you can't reverse it because the tabs are on the correct side here, and there's no way to get it wrong in this case. which is good for people like me. Here are the oil holes I'm referring to. The oil hole is going to line up with the hole in the bearing, and then pressurized oil is going to squirt through these galleys and make your engine super happy. Now I'm plastic gauging the main bearing oil clearance, just like I showed you in the manual here. Plastic gauge, if you don't know, is just a thin strip of plastic. You put it between the bearing and the crank, or the crank and the rod bearings, once we get to that here in a little bit. And you torque it down to specification, and then on the side of the packaging here, there is a gauge. It's a plastic gauge, and it'll smash the plastic thin, and it will give you an approximation of the bearing clearance. So on this engine, it needs to be under 2 thousandths. So ideally, it's between 1 thousandth and 15 thousandths down in here per the specs. So I'm taking the little pieces of plastic here and laying them on the mains. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now let's smash them down. So I'm measuring at 2 thousandths everywhere. Right there you can see 2 thousandths, 2 thousandths, 2 thousandths, closer to 15 thousandths. So that is at the maximum acceptable spec. I have read that some people with turbo engines like running things a tiny bit looser. So machine work is done, so I think we are where we're going to be. You're going to have plastic residue on everything, including the crank. I use like a credit card or similar, gently, and it takes the plastic right off. And just get all that junk out of there, away from your oil holes. Alright, gonna lube this thing up. Hopefully put it in for the final time here. Lovely. This is really exciting to finally see this engine starting to come together. The crank is in permanently, and now we're going to mock up our rods, pistons. We'll put the pins in the pistons. The snap rings will go in there as well, and then we'll slide them in the holes without piston rings, no lube. We will have bearings, and we'll torque them to spec with plastic gauge. You'll notice each rod has numbers on it. I'm going to keep those numbers facing the back of the car, and then the arrow on the piston is going to face the back side of the engine, the flywheel, and that puts the larger intake valve reliefs on the intake side. If this faces the front of the car, then you have the smaller exhaust valve reliefs on the intake side, and that's not what you want. Alright, now's the time to make sure this thing is seated all the way in there. So double, triple check. You don't want that thing coming loose when you're
giving it 30 pounds of boost from the Wuhan war whistle. Alright, there's another one. And I won't bore you guys with all of them, but I'm going to put some oil in the oil holes. Just make sure this thing is lubed. I'd rather make a mess with too much oil than make a mess with not enough oil. Here's the finished product. Looking sharp. Alright, tonight we are going to go ahead and grind some piston rings, set these piston ring gaps. I will put the formula for boosted applications and determining your piston ring gap up on the screen here, I think. But definitely Google around, do some research. Piston ring gap needs to be much more if you are boosting. That gives it more room for heat, because you're going to have extreme heat under boost, and eventually your ring gaps, if there's not enough gap, they'll touch and then they will break the ring gland out of the piston. So what you want to do is perform your calculations, determine what you want your ring gap to be, and then you'll have to make that gap happen. So I'm going to start with my second piston rings here. I'm going to fit them in the block. I'm going to measure them. My goal is to get 20 thousandths on the second ring, and then I'm going to do like 19 thousandths on the top ring. That'll give me enough gap not to have a bunch of blow by, but it will give me plenty of safety room for sending lots of boost to this engine. So I measured these rings earlier, but I'll show you real quick how I measure them, the gaps. So basically what you do, now be careful here not to score cylinder walls. So you're going to pop the ring in here, you're going to compress it a little bit and pop it down. And then you will center that ring in the bore with a piston. So push it down like an inch or so. Since this engine has new bores, they're really nice and round and square. If you're using a used block, just be careful where you put it, because there will be taper, so some places will be more worn than others. So you want to measure it in several places in the bore. So not doing that this time. That's kind of why this Mustang here has some sweet blow by. It's got massive ring gaps. I don't even want to tell you the numbers. Alright, basically you just see the gap right there. You're just going to be measuring that gap. And we're going to grind the ring to have about a 20 thousandths. Alright, today I'm going to be measuring the rod bearing clearances. So I've got my pistons in order here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's the same direction as my block here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm not putting the rings in yet. You could go ahead and put your rings in, compress them, put them in the hole, and just make sure you have assembly lube on the top here. And then do your plastic gauge on this side with no assembly lube. And then scrape your plastic gauge off and put assembly lube on the cap and do a final torque. But I'm going to do it a little bit longer way. I'm not putting rings in, I'm just going to slide the piston in the hole and put the crank at the bottom of the throw here. Check my clearance, pop the piston right back out, make sure they're all good, and then I'll go ahead and do final assembly with assembly lube and piston rings. If you want to do it fast the other way, that is perfectly fine. I just want to make sure this thing is going to live a long time if possible. Alright, I'm going to put this number 1 piston in the hole now, making sure I don't scrape off cylinder walls or on the bearing journals. And before I put these in, just for this test fitting, I am lubing the snot out of the skirts here and the whole piston. You can't have too much oil here. I'm guiding it down onto the crank, nice and slow. Now quick look at the caps, just to make sure you don't miss this. Caps always have markings, and you want to make sure the markings are together on the same side, because that is the way that this rod was machined. You see this says 1002. On the back side there are no markings. So no markings on one side and the indication on the other. Also, I had 1001 through 1004, so I just used 1 through 4 for holes number 1 through 4. I found multiple metal shavings on these new bearings out of the package from the manufacturer. So check right here, like this oiling hole. I found 3 different metal shavings on 3 different bearings in this oiling hole just from the manufacturing process. So go through and knock those out with your fingers. Also, you're not supposed to get skin oil on bearings. I don't know if that's true or false, but I always try to avoid it. That's why I'm wearing these gloves. All right, I'm compressing this number 1 just to test the plastic gauge clearance. So I'm gonna do 20 pounds, then like 30, and then the final 55 that ARP requires. There's 20. Also, when I'm torquing these rod bolts down, I am using this ARP lube that came with these ARP rod bolts. This is critical for getting your right torque specifications. Now I'm going to pop the cap off and we're going to measure the plastic gauge. So yeah, we're right at the between 15 thousandths and 2 thousandths, which is going to work. So that is cylinder number 1. Now we're going to install piston rings on the pistons to get ready to slam these things home. The first thing we're going to put in is the oil ring here. It's expandable. You see this? It's kind of hard to see here, but it expands. It has a little wire. I put this in first because then the 2 oil rings kind of sit on a little shelf that's made in here. So first thing I do, I am staggering the ring gaps. So I'll throw a diagram up now and show you the order in which I do that. That makes sure that none of those gaps even get close to aligning to let any compression or combustion gases through to the crankcase. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line my piston with the diagram. The diagram has exhaust valves on this side and intake valves on this side. So my oil expander ring is just going to align at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to put that in now. And it's as simple as that. Now the ends, the instructions on this, always read your instructions. The instructions on that oil ring say never to overlap the ends. So just make sure you're following whatever instructions came with your piston rings. Next, I'm going to put the lower oil ring on. Don't really need a tool for this one yet. So let's look at the lower oil. That's going to be about 10 o'clock. So I'm going to put the gap at about 10 o'clock. Let's see here. I'm going to do the lower, so I'm going to put it on the lower channel. Just got to be careful not to scrape the piston. It is aluminum and these are hardened steel. Alright, now I'm going to put the top oil ring on. That top oil ring is going to be, I don't know, 5 o'clock, so total opposite of the bottom oil ring. Now make sure you know which ring is your top and your bottom. And sometimes they're directional with a mark on the top. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I clock this one, barely expand it. I don't want to stretch this thing out much. Put it in the second groove. Now do note that I am keeping all these rings with the hole that they are in because I filed each of these to have the exact clearance ring gap that I need for this boosted application. Each piston I'm going to cover in oil. Get it in the ring lands there. And we'll just crank her down. Yeah, you never want to force it. If it's going in hard, stop. Delicious. So helpful. You're very funny. Oh, I love you too, Mr. Finnegan.
You're the best dad ever.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
His garage is a mess.
It's actually pretty clean.
Yeah, for its age, for the house of age.
Yeah, that turns over nice and smooth.
Hey, Dad, can you come hurry up for us?
Yep, I'll be right up. Hey, come see this while you're here.
I just have Spider-Man suit on. I'm trying to not get
Spider-Man's here! You wanna put your mask on? Spider-Man's here. Thank you for watching this. This is a 30-minute video. That's not my normal type of video, but I put this engine together at nights over like a month. So if you saw different outfits throughout the thing, that's what happened. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed seeing this engine get put together, or if this helped you put your D-Series Honda engine together, let me know in the comments below and hit that like button. I appreciate it. Thank you.